if I'm coming from a background of maybe somebody says, okay, this has face validity, but how do we know this is not just a specious argument when you look at how so many bodybuilders have gotten, and I know you said before, like, you're not saying that these ways can't work. So I'm straw manning a little bit, but just in the sense that you have so many people who do it really, like, not necessarily what you're talking about. And then obviously you've developed a great physique yourself, but what do you tell people who say, like, I've been doing this for so long, and look how much evidence we have for this versus what you're saying?
Okay, look, Dave Palumbo recently said something like, look, all I know is when I squatted 600 pounds, I had 33-inch quads.
Yeah.
All right, fair enough. I never said 600 pounds would not develop 33-inch quads. What I'm saying is there's a road you can take, and that road could be a really bumpy, dirty, muddy, rocky road, or you could take a smoother road that'll get you there also. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing. So, there's a lot of people, I'm sure that are emotionally attached to conventional weight training. So they will argue, well, nobody's ever built a Mr. America body or a Mr. Olympia body doing your exercises. Yeah, that's right. Not yet, because this is just now coming to light. This is just now being exposed, right? This should have been exposed. Like, weight training has been around for 100 years. Why didn't anybody tell us the role that physics plays in this? Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, this is factual stuff. In other words, my book is endorsed by 10 PhDs, one of which is a guy from NASA who's a physics PhD, right? And these numbers all add up. So the question is this: which of these two would make your quadricep grow better? 1,200 pounds of resistance or 950 pounds of resistance? 1,200 pounds of resistance, right? 1,200 pounds of resistance is what you get on your quads if you weigh 200 pounds and you do a sissy squat and let your lower leg get horizontal. 950 pounds is the load you get on your quadricep if you weigh 200 pounds and have a 200-pound barbell on your back and do a traditional lower leg tilt of about 30 degrees. So one clearly loads the muscle more, but you look like a sissy doing it, right? Never mind the name. But we've got to look at this more intellectually. I'm not saying let's not lift heavy weight or let's challenge a muscle. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is let's figure out a way to get more load on that muscle without crushing, your skeleton in the process.
And do you think there's anything, I think, you have a very strong point from the physics and biomechanics aspect of it. Do you think that there's anything we haven't discussed yet or that we're missing where it's like, look, like, if we have this model, this force is applied and based on this moment arm, that makes sense. But could we be missing anything that has to do with, how the body tends to actually move? Like, for instance, nobody's actually doing sissy squats in real life, right? Even if you could manipulate your body to do that, could we be missing something of what is, I hate to say, like a natural argument, but like, okay, the body is meant to squat, let's say, for instance. Like, do you think we're missing anything there of what we're really like meant to be doing?
Well, I'll tell you some of the arguments, and that's a good one. So number one is a quadricep has a job to do, and that job is to extend the knee. And the glutes have a job to do, and that job is to extend the hip. If those muscles are worked separately and you make those muscles stronger, when you do have to sit in a chair or climb a ladder or do a squatting type of movement, those muscles will do what they are strong enough to do in perfect coordination. Now, if you're an athlete and let's say you're a basketball player and you have to do jump squats, basically, because that's what you're doing when you're rebounding and things like that, I would say definitely do squats as part of your sports training because it simulates what you're doing on the court. But there's a lot of people that don't like squats, right? And I would say you don't have to do squats. Should you do squats? You shouldn't. I wouldn't say you should. Can you do squats? Is it bad that you do squats? No, it's not bad for you to do squats, especially if you're using just body weight or relatively light weight. The problem is that when we want maximum muscle gain, and the only way for you to do that is to load your spine more and more and more, then you have to start factoring in the cost. And the cost of putting 500 or 600, 700 pounds on your back shouldn't be ignored, right? You should say to yourself, okay, you were talking function. This guy who's squatting 700 pounds, he's not talking about functional adaptation. For what in the world could he possibly do that will require that, right? So if his objective is to chase muscle growth, he shouldn't be thinking about ways of compensating for the inefficiency of the lower leg levers by adding more weight. He should be thinking of fixing the efficiency of the lower leg levers to increase muscle load. That would be the wiser approach. Now, here's another thing that people say is, well, what about, when you squat, 400, 500 pounds, you get a testosterone increase and you get a growth hormone increase. Well, what actually is and there's a study, I don't know if you saw this recently, Brad Schoenfeld just reported this. What happens is, yes, you get an increase of testosterone when you have an energy crisis. When squats or another compound exercise is done with enough weight and enough reps that it becomes massively taxing on your central nervous system. And then you produce testosterone and growth hormone. Why? To compensate for the cortisol that you've just created. So they've just done this study now that have found that these people did not actually get any additional muscle growth from this increase because now they're realizing there was something else that was a catabolic happening at the same time.
Yeah, I think at least as long as I've been in this, it's maybe not as long, but for a while now, I think it's been more or less shown that these acute transient changes in testosterone and growth hormone, don't do a ton for us. And I believe actually, if they look at the correlation between growth, it's actually stronger with the cortisol response, which obviously, I wouldn't say is a cause of it, but the correlation is there even more than it is with growth hormone and testosterone. So that argument, I think, is taken down.
It neutralizes. Yeah,
for sure. Do you find people with sissy squats get patellar issues? Because that is one I've heard with that exercise in particular.
Well, okay, that's a good question. The first thing that we would have to say is what happens during a sissy squat, right? Well, what happens obviously is that you are applying a progressively more perpendicular resistance to the lower leg, right? So the question is a perpendicular resistance to the lower leg a bad thing? Well, the first thing I would say is a perpendicular resistance is what we rely on for everything. When you're doing tricep skull crushers, you're relying on a perpendicular resistance on your forearm. When you're doing curls, you're relying on a perpendicular resistance against your forearm pulling the other direction. When you're doing side raises, perpendicular resistance to the lever that's being worked by your target muscle is essential, right? So the idea of this whole thing about keeping your knees back behind your toes when you're squatting is an indirect way of saying, don't let your lower leg get perpendicular. Keep it vertical, keep it neutral. Well, the more non-perpendicular it is to resistance, the more closer to parallel with resistance it is, the less load you get on that muscle. So could you spare your knees by not loading your quadriceps? Yeah. In other words, if you have bad elbows, you're going to have a hard time loading heavily your triceps. If you have bad knees, you're going to have a hard time loading your quadriceps without bringing into play the hand. So there's nothing inherently wrong mechanically with a sissy squat other than the fact that it gives you a much greater percentage of load on the quadricep by way of the patella tendon.
Gotcha. So you feel the knee pain is essential. You feel the knee pain is basically just because you're getting greater quad stimulus.
That combined with the fact that you don't have good knees to begin with.
Right. Okay.
In other words, a perfectly healthy knee won't have that trouble. Right. And a knee look, the degree of involvement of the knee is directly related to the degree of involvement of the quadricep. The more quadricep load, the more knee involvement, right? So you can get the same amount of knee involvement with a squat that you can with a sissy squat if you use enough weight.